Great eye contact.
Hey now, it's your boy PSA Sitch here with another Tuesday show with everyone's favorite master of eye contact, Adam Friended.
What's up? How you doing? We have a very special guest here, Katherine Brodsky. Is it Brodsky or Brodsky?
No, it's Brodsky. You said it right, and then
Okay?
you hesitated,
Nice,
and then you
nice.
ruined
I
it.
should have just went with it.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes there's Weinstein and Weinstein, and
I thought it was
there's
Weinstein for the longest time, and yeah, that
I
Mhm.
I
I
almost got
like
in
to
trouble
get
for that.
I like to get people's names right, especially when we're having a conversation with them. So, but you've been on trigonometry recently. You've been on Tim Pool's The Culture War. So I saw you on Tim Pool's The Culture War, and as I said before the stream started, I was completely triggered, not by you, more by Tim Pool. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm going to turn it over to Sitch for whatever his first question is.
Oh, well, why don't you tell people how you had your own cancellation experience, and is this what set you off down this pathway, I guess?
This pathway of exploring speech and talking to different people, I think that was something that I inherently always enjoyed, but
Mhm.
I was quite, I would say, muted and demure in my contact, and I didn't have a lot of people necessarily outside of my own echo chamber that I communicated with, not intentionally, but that was just kind of the environments that I found myself in. I work in journalism, I work in film and television, so there's a tendency to have a degree of consensus, or at least a perceived consensus. So, with my own sort of culture or cancellation story, it definitely, somebody said it's my hero stories or my hero arc, or maybe it's my villain. It's really hard to know. We'll see. You either live long enough to become the hero of your own story or the villain. And
There
I
you
think
go.
different people are going to disagree. But in my case, I did have a brush with cancellation where essentially I had a mob of people go after me because I defended somebody's right to, I had a job board. And on this job board on Facebook, it was for women. And somebody posted an opportunity, a job opening at Fox. And people just got very, very upset at the original job sharer and went after her with a lot of ad honems. And I thought, well, that's not right. So I ended up making a post saying, let's be civil and let's take politics out of it and not go after people and make peace, not war, essentially. It had that kind of tone to it. People didn't appreciate that, and so they started calling me names like white supremacist. They said I'd soon let the KKK recruit from my job board, and it sort of escalated from there to harassment, cancellation attempts, like trying to get editors to never work with me again, different threats, doxing attempts, and things like that. And through it all, I was getting a lot of messages from people saying, we see what's happening to you. We feel ashamed that it's wrong. People shared their own experiences with me of their own sort of cancellations or losing their jobs, their livelihoods, their friend circles. And so it did ultimately cause me to want to um understand different people more, use my own speech, not be as scared to reach out across the aisle. And, these days I talk to anyone, whether it's somebody who's a communist, where I very strongly disagree with communism, having come from a communist country. But
Mhm.
but it can be really civil and a very interesting discourse. And I'll talk to people. I've talked to people on all sorts of spectrums. So I think that was my definitely part of a big part of my journey. And I don't know if that would have happened to the same extent if that triggering incident didn't also happen.
So you got in all this trouble just because you ran a job board and just said, "Hey, there's a job opening at Fox News," and that was enough to just get everyone
Yeah,
insane?
it
Like,
wasn't even me posting the job. It was somebody else posting the job opportunity. So it was just me being unhappy with how this person was being attacked. And I made a very
right.
civil post. I mean, it did they also said at the time, well, you can't take politics out of the group because it's a group for women. And I said, okay. Well, I don't want it to be political, so then okay, I guess I'll open it up for everyone, and
Hmm.
here's a month's notice, and you can create your own group, and I'll amplify it. But that actually got people far even more angry than the initial incident with the
Hmm.
posting of
That's
Fox
pretty
News.
based. You're like, oh, you're gonna complain? Well, let me just make you more
Yeah,
upset.
because I think the first one, it was like a trap I walked into and I
Uh-huh.
wasn't aware of what was going to happen. I thought people would just be like, oh, yeah, right, we shouldn't go after people. Um,
You
and
thought they'd agree with you.
I did think they would agree with me.
Naive, the
I was very naive.
naivete.
I was definitely very naive at the time because when I talk to people about this now, as I'm telling the story, they always know what's coming.
Yeah.
But I
Hmm.
really did not know what's coming. And I was naive because it seemed like very sensible to me. And then when I made my base decision, that was a decision because I imagine people would be much more upset because now I'm sort of standing by my decision and my principle, and it goes against what they believe. So in that case, I was like, well, I don't want politics in my group, and
Hmm.
if that's what you're saying, well, I'm happy to make it open
When
for men.
when was this?
This was in 2021, which is why I can
Mm,
kind of talk about it now with like a great degree of detachment,
right.
healthy detachment, and humor. Because also having it in the rear view mirror, I'm like, well, this really was such an insane thing to go after somebody for. At the time, I was like, maybe they have a point. Like maybe there's something I'm missing. If so many people are angry at me, like maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
Right.
But I thought about it a lot, and now that I've had this distance, like it's just makes it was so nonsensical.
Of course. Were you before this like really politically active at all, or was this kind of like
Not at
born?
all.
Hmm.
Not at all. Like I consider myself a liberal, because of the various views that I have, but not a political individual at all.
Right.
I still don't really consider myself a political individual, even though some people now, I guess, think that I am. I talk about things that affect us in society, as opposed to just, oh, this politician, but I do care about the structures. I think the political structures are broken, so I do talk about that. Before
Hmm.
this, I was definitely talking a lot about how, being a journalist, I was seeing how that system was being compromised. So I did talk about things like that, but I just never saw them as political, I guess, or saw myself as political or really I never really thought about people in that way either. I didn't think, oh, this person is a Republican, this is a Democrat, this is a conservative or a liberal. Like it just wasn't something that I focused my attention on.
What
Hmm.
what kind of journalism were you doing?
Yeah, so a lot of the journalism, probably why I avoided getting into too much heat too soon, was I did a lot of cultural journalism. So I did stories, a lot of film, TV related content. So a lot of interviews with celebrities. I did some technology writing, occasionally psychology articles, business, and a lot of travel writing as well. So it was much more cultural than it certainly wasn't political or opinion. It was really reporting for the most part. Very little of it, had my own opinion in it.
Do you think there was like a liberal slant or a conservative slant in the reporting?
In my reporting, do you mean in my reporting?
Yeah, yeah, or in the reporting that was going on around you, even with your
Around me, a
colleagues and
hundred,
whatnot.
yeah, around
Okay,
me, it's 100% liberal. In
okay.
my reporting, I would say there was definitely, I always tried to be a really objective writer.
Oh,
And so
like
I
a
did,
real journalist. I
like
love
a
it.
real journalist. But there were like all these principles that the editors that I worked with in the past, who were old school editors, they were really good about asking me the right questions on the pieces when they were making edits to sort of hone in on like not allowing my subjectivity to come in. Everything sort of had to be
Oh,
backed up.
really?
And yeah, they were
Oh,
really,
okay.
really good. And I think now you have a generation that's really different. And so there reporters coming up now just don't have the benefit of those notes that I think made me a much stronger writer. And I always held objectivity as a high standard. Now, is there some, I mean, it's impossible to be 100% objective. think the goal should be to strive for that. And of course, like in the topics that I would pick, right, in the what I chose to include or not include in an article, there is inherently some levels of biases, but I usually focused on like, what do I find interesting? What do I think the reader will find interesting? What makes a better story, as opposed to like, this is my agenda. Like, so I interviewed a lot of people where I didn't necessarily agree with their viewpoints, but I don't think you could tell from my writing that's the case. It's more about letting, my subjects tell the story. But of course, I'm sure there's like levels of biases that sneak in at some points. It's just that I've worked really hard not to have that happen.
That's good. It won't happen if you don't strive for it. That's for sure.
Well, exactly. But nowadays, there is this sense of like, no, it's your responsibility to have the bias, right? It's that
Yeah.
activism, journalism, and there's a big battle going on between sort of the old school journalists and the new generation, where they're like, you know, we have these values of objectivity, and it's important to present multiple sides if there are multiple sides to present. It doesn't mean both sidisms, because not every side is equal, but you're trying to get to the truth of something, right? You're trying to be as accurate as you can be. And I think with younger journalists, the principles are different. It's more cause-based. Like, they get into journalism because they want to shine a light on something, a cause. They want to change the world. For me, I guess I'm a very selfish person, because what I wanted to do with journalism is like, I'm just curious and I want to learn about this. And oh, I think you'd enjoy hearing about this too, because it's interesting. So that was always my approach from the very beginning. Like I say, driven by curiosity. And really, that's always been at the core for me. And I think for a lot of journalists, but I think it has shifted to a point of like, no, I want to use journalism as a tool to change the world. So of course, then your own opinions and values are going to dictate what you're going to write, what you're going to write about, how you're going to cover it, who you're going to include or exclude. So that's a big part of it.
There's a very dogmatic slant on the left that really kind of is the death of curiosity. It's like, we have all the answers now. We don't need the answers. We need to share the truth with the world. So I'm very much against that. Sitch, I don't want to move on if you have any more questions about the journalist stuff, but
Well, what do you think caused this shift in journalism?
That's a really good question. I am not entirely sure, if it's about power equilibriums, perhaps, um, just differently educated generations where, the values are different in terms of different peers. I don't know if I have a great answer, because, every generation is quite different. And some generations are more coddled generations, for example. They're more sensitive, more, the politically correct, and that plays into it, because every generation sort of responds to how they've been treated, and then parents based on that. And so maybe part of that is a reactionary thing, and then you have a lot of people who might have had a lack of power and a lack of representation in the popular culture, and now suddenly they have the power. So with that power, they feel like now they can tell certain kinds of stories, or this is their fight. This is a responsibility. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, and I don't know how much sense that made. It's a really good question, and I wish I had a better understanding exactly of. So I guess I'll say I don't know. I have some suspicions, but I don't know for sure.
I would wager, and this will bring us to the next question, which kind of came up when your talk with Constantine, which is like, I would wager it's that wokeness, this concept of wokeness, has captured a lot of institutions, a lot of colleges, and I think a lot of journalist programs in colleges. And so, how do you define wokeness, and what do you think wokeness is?
Well, I mean, wokeness is there's obviously two definitions. The old school definition is just being awakened to injustices and being aware. I think that's
Hmm.
a perfectly good way to be think we should all be woke in that old school term. Obviously now in the cultural discourse, wokeness has become something else, and I think it to me it represents a set of behaviors. And I see that wokeness, by the way, on the left and on the right, because I look at it in terms of behaviors as opposed to just an ideology. So to me, it's about intolerance. It's about these kinds of bullying tactics, being hypersensitive, viewing oneself as a victim, or seeing a group of people as a victim. So I think a lot of this comes out of that. And, you know, it's true that the wokeness or just indoctrination, ideological capture has happened more in academia, but also I still wonder, it's like, okay, but how did it get in there? Why
Hmm.
did it get in there? And I don't know if I've heard a lot of like very good explanations for it. I think the closest that I would come to explaining it, I really do think it's about power and victimhood. I think a lot of it comes from people who see themselves as victims. In some cases, they are victims, not having the power to control their lives or change. And then when they do have the power, then they wield it in kind of authoritarian ways. And you see that even, I was talking to someone about bullying recently. And you see how with some bullies, you would think that if you were being bullied, you would grow up to be a more empathetic person because you understand, well, you understand how it feels. I say this as someone who has been bullied. And, for me, that's my takeaway. I'm like, okay, this is how I'm gonna treat people. If I see somebody standing on their own in a corner and I'm more comfortable, like maybe I'll help include them. So, because I know what it feels like to be an outsider, I know what it feels like to have people pick on you. But the psychological phenomenon in a lot of people's minds is that actually when they're no longer the bullied, they become the bully because now they have the power. I don't know 100% why that happens, but we see that happening. We see that happening, even I bring up this story with my dad. He said that when he went to the army, they had this hazing ritual. And the new recruits would have to undergo this really horrible hazing ritual. It was quite awful. It was in the Soviet Union, so it was extra awful.
Hmm.
And he said, but the weird thing is like they couldn't wait for the next set of recruits so they can do the same thing to them.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
something about humanity that's very
Hmm.
depressing, actually.
Yeah, no, like, because I have the exact same attitude that you have, where I would look at hazing specifically. I was in Boy Scouts. Obviously, it was nothing like, being so Army of Soviet Union, but the older scouts were like, assholes to us and haze us. And I had a very like conscious thought of like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to allow that to happen to the younger scouts when I'm older, because that just seems like a dick thing to do. But there is like this super weird uh human psychological aspect where people have this idea of like, well, experienced this thing, so now it's like my turn. I
Yeah.
deserve it, or maybe revenge to like, inflict the same status on, someone else in the same situation that I was once in. And then it becomes like this weird bonding ritual, like a rite of passage, and people just get off on it. And
And
it's
it
sad.
doesn't make sense to me because, like, yeah, somebody did that to you. You didn't like it. Why would you go do it to somebody else? And not the same. It's not even you taking revenge on the people who did it to you. It's just a completely different set of people. It's kind of like it makes me think a little bit about this kind of white supremacy argument, right? Where like everyone's a white supremacist, or yeah, like the system of white supremacy. You're by default guilty of crimes just because you're white or whatever.
Hmm.
And it's like, but those are people who are not like alive back then. It's to the same thing, I don't hold people, I'm Jewish. And if I'm in Germany, like I don't hold people accountable who had no participation or no involvement in, the genocide of my family. Like I see this is a new generation and
Right.
they are responsible for themselves. They never had a choice as to how to behave. They never had a choice as what to their forefathers did. Maybe they're abusive to them. Like, we don't know anything. And so, but I think maybe this ties in a little bit with this idea of like, well, we're the victims. Now we have power. We can now let's punish a whole new set of group of people who don't even have anything to do with what might have happened to you.
Just
Yeah.
we should give the counter argument on the hazing thing. Like a little light hazing could be good. Obviously, people who face adversity tend to come out stronger. It's a way for people to test who's going to have my back. It's a way to build loyalty. I mean, it sticks around for a reason. It does have some evolutionary advantages, obviously. But look, I don't like. I just think you kind of have to weigh all sides of the behavior. I
don't know. I
can
feel like
definitely
life
go.
is hard enough.
Well, no, I think hazing can definitely go too far. Like all things in moderation, right? A balance. If you're beating the crap out of the next generation and it's progressively getting worse and worse, yeah, it's probably time to step in. But I think going in the other direction and just outlawing hazing, this is how we get this coddled generation here that's never faced any sort of
Well,
adversity.
hazing and being honest are two different things in my view. And you can do a little light ribbing. Like, I worked on a show called Jack Ryan, and we shot it like around the world, including Morocco. And we had some Navy SEALs on the crew. And I remember at first they were really polite with me, very nice to me. And then gradually, as we got to know each other, I started getting a lot of ribbing. But that was like how they accept you, and they do kind of test you out in that way.
Yes,
And
they want to
I
know if you're
love that, but
cool.
they're not trying to like hurt me. It's just light teasing. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think people should be honest. I think the coddling is different. Coddling is when you don't tell the truth to make somebody feel better. If it's inherently a dishonest thing. It's
Mhm.
like, I don't think you need to go and be like, a total jerk about everything that you say, brutal honesty for the sake of brutal honesty, but being able to joke around and say slightly inappropriate things, or just be honest when somebody asks you a question. Those are the things that actually that we need. And a lot of it isn't happening. And I think a lot of it also comes down to the parents. And this is my Eastern European background showing. But, my parents may be too hard on me sometimes. But, I look at Western parents and just how much they coddle their kids. Like, they can do no wrong. Everything gets praise. And sometimes I'm like, I wish my parents did that. So there's a jealousy element there. But at the same time, it bothers me because they don't call their kids out on things they shouldn't do. If their kid wants this, like, they get this, and the parents can't put their foot down. And I think that's part of what's contributed to this generation that is coddled, doesn't hear no, that's so weak when they hear something that hurts their feelings, and who does see themselves as these activists because that's what they need to be, instead of just pursuer, like, people. The humility is in there, because like curiosity is connected to humility in some ways, because you're like, well, I wonder, I don't know this. You need to be able to say, I don't know much about this, I need to learn more.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can just imagine being in Boy Scouts with Sitch and Sitch saying, "Look, we're going to break the cycle of violence," and me saying, "Well, I mean, can't we just do a little hazing?"
Well, I think there's multiple types of hazing. I think there could be constructive hazing in terms of, kind of look at like the way, the military kind of trains new recruits, where it's like you're supposed to have some drill instructor that kind of like runs you through hell and, does some hazing. Obviously things have kind of softened up now, and it's like the adversity of having everyone against this one person can create a bond in the group.
Yes.
And that's definitely a thing. But I think it's very different than that group then turning around and like enacting bullying or violence against someone else, right? Because then suddenly they're the perpetrators of the thing. And I
Well,
think
it's
it's very
interesting.
different. I
No, it's
think it's
interesting
very.
because they get
Mhm.
very, like when it's a group going against one person, you said that it builds a certain level of bonding. And I do see that people, when they gossip, they sort of bond, right? And
Of
they'll target
course,
one
yes.
person. But my answer, I still think it's inherently wrong. And so I wish that we would find better ways to bond because this is not the only way to bond. There's
Sure.
other ways that we can. So,
Yeah, it all, I mean, obviously it depends on like what is the reason for bonding against someone. Like if it's, the slave master, maybe it's a good reason to bond against them, right? But if it's like,
yes, I would say so.
sure, but if it's like Jerry at work and everyone picks on
Yeah,
Jerry
that's
at
not
work because
good.
they all
Leave
hate
Jerry
him,
alone.
right? Like, but that is unfortunately one of the classic human ways that we've evolved to bond is to everyone kind of pick an enemy and crap all over them. And I think with hazing, you just have to be careful in terms of, especially when it comes to age-based hazing, because usually you have, kids going through puberty who are kind of, wildly out of control, who are being, horrible a-holes to kids younger than them. I don't think that's generally an appropriate behavior.
No,
Right.
and you
And I think that's
generally
different than
don't.
like ribbing. So
Yeah, and you generally do, it's very hard to recover from that. Like if that happens to you as a child, like you certainly can't, you will, right? Like like for me, having gone through some of that and some other hardships, like you're right. I do feel like it's made me stronger because I've had to face these hardships. I had to figure out. Um, but at the same time, I do think there are other ways. You'll encounter a lot of hardships in life. You'll encounter heartbreak, people, messing with you, people betraying you. There'll always be hardships. It doesn't have to come in the form of like bullying, which I think ultimately is so destructive. And I am glad that I'm not glad I was bullied, but I definitely took away a lot from it. That
mhm.
was positive, and I never saw myself as a victim in any way in anything in life. And I think that sort of gave me a different mindset. So I do see it as just as okay, I went through this thing in hardship. What did I learn? Okay, what can I do better in the future? I mean, that's kind of how my mind works. Maybe I'm autistic, but it's been suggested recently. But it is something where not everyone will go through it that way, and some people take their lives. And then I think also, even for me, um, there is a hurt that never quite goes away. I will never feel like I belong. And again, that could be a positive, it could be a negative. Obviously, that can be a painful thing. To feel like always an outsider can feel very lonely, but also gives you a certain degree of independence and
Mhm.
self-assuredness, and you have yourself to rely on, and you're not as tribal.
Do
Right.
you
I was wondering if I wonder if that feeling of the outsiderness is what allowed you to sort of see past the veil of, the people acting woke and incorrectly in the job sport thing and to not just kind of fall prey to the mind group virus.
Yeah, I think it did. I think in general, my upbringing made me feel like so I was an outsider because as much as I really wanted to fit in growing up, like very much, especially being an immigrant, I really wanted to fit in. And I immigrated twice, in my life to very different countries. And neither time was it easy for me to sort of fit in. So I did become sort of an outsider by default. And then also the way that my parents raised me, I think they always raised me to question things, which is why I think, people now leave too much or blame too much on academia, which is not blameless. But parenting, part of parenting is giving your kids critical thinking skills and telling them to question things, not to just listen blindly to everything that's being said. So I think the combination of the two things, I was always able to look at things from the outside. I think there are some blind spots that I did have and probably still do, but it definitely like I never felt like part of that tribe. So it was easier for me, I think, to see through when things weren't adding up. I was always very logical about, if, I'm very emotional and sensitive, but at the same time, if there's a new policy or something like that, I don't tend to look at it just from like, oh my God, this sounds really nice, I have a strong BS detector, like land acknowledgements, for example, never added up to me, right? It's like, okay, you're acknowledging somebody's land, you're not giving it back to them. Like what is it doing but virtue signaling? So things like that I was always like really aware of. And but I will tell you that I probably didn't speak out against that as much. I did sometimes. Like I wasn't completely silent, and I'd tell my friends and I make jokes and I'd make fun of it, but certainly not in a public way. But I do
Hmm.
think my mindset was very like, an outside observer looking in always, even when I was like, part of this group. I wasn't really part of the group in a way, right? So I think it makes
Right.
it easier to see through. There's no
So,
buy-in.
Do you want to move
mhm.
on to well, everyone wants us to talk a little bit more about the right wing wokeness.
Sure.
I want to ask on the bullying thing just because I've read about the biological sex differences between men and women and how they're vastly different when in situations of bullying. Female bullies tend to be very popular girls, and male bullies tend to be the loser, the outsider. So it's a completely different dynamic. If you're being gone after by mean girls, it can be, devastating, something you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life. I've been bullied by guys in school and ended up being better friends with my bully than anything. So it's a completely different dynamic. And I'm curious if you've read like a lot of biological sex differences are denied on the left just wholesale.
Well, no, of course there's the biological difference where I would say that in high school it's not necessarily the case that the outsider male is the bully. I think it's still usually the part of the in group, or people want to be part of the in group. But I will say that the bullying amongst women, I find it higher, and what literature has sort of shown is that it has to do with also, men are more physical and women are less physically capable, so they use, words as their
Yeah,
weapons far
reputation
more.
destruction, the
Reputation
signature move of
destruction.
the mean girl bully. Yeah,
Yeah, and you see a lot more mean girl bullies for sure. And definitely the bullying came more from women. It wasn't entirely just women though, in my case. It was both. Um, more as an adult, it was almost entirely women. So it's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
online is almost made for the female style of bullying. Reputation destruction is what's happening on social media so often.
Well, because they know they can do that, and so it's a real weapon. I notice because I get like horrible DMs all the time and messages from all sorts of people on all
Really?
sides of the spectrum. Yeah, and what I've noticed is that women, you're right, are more reputational. So I'm far less likely to get that kind of a DM from a female. I get those more from men, and they can be incredibly crude, explicit, very hard and aggressive. But it doesn't have bite to it, right? There's not really much that they can do to me. I mean, assuming that they're not so insane that they would actually like show up at my house and do something. There isn't like a real threat to it versus with women, it's a lot more subtle, but there is a real threat to at least my livelihood or my reputation. And so it's in a way it's more impactful. They don't have, I think they go so hard because they know that inherently they don't have the power to do anything, but they're angry and they want to express their anger.
Right. So on the right wing woke, so you're defining woke as just this kind of behavior, like this cancel culture behavior. But I want to posit that the original definition of woke that you're talking about, the awake to social injustice. I don't know if
Hmm.
you saw this clip that's going around, but SNL did a skit last week where they talked about debanking and how debanking is this thing that they've never heard of, that they're completely asleep to, which
Wow.
seems to be a kind of injustice that conservatives are facing that a lot of people on the left are completely unaware of. So doesn't that fit the traditional definition of woke?
I'm so surprised that that SNL did this skit. I want to see it. But what do you mean, like in the injustice of being debanked?
Yes, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
SNL doing the skit makes it seem like they're completely unaware of this thing that's going on where, conservative commentators, conservative content creators will get a letter in the mail, basically losing their bank account.
Well, it is an injustice, I think. And, maybe people on the left don't see it as an injustice because it hasn't happened to them yet. And I add the word yet. Actually has. It's just you have to go a little bit further than you need, because it's actually, I do know people who it has happened to who are on the left, like artists and people like that. So it does happen on the left too. They're just unaware. And maybe it's because that person went a little bit too far off the edge. But yeah, no, it is an injustice. And this is why I don't like to use the word woke in just one direction. By the way, it doesn't mean that the grievances are always false. Just like on the left, some of those grievances are accurate. Same on the right, some of these grievances are accurate. Like the reason that some people on the right see themselves as victims is because of things like debanking, being fired for their speech or not allowed their speech, being deplatformed, not having power, institutional power, which right now is much more, controlled by the left. So these are legitimate grievances, but the thing is, in both cases, the reactions can be, to see yourself as such a victim that you are entitled to act out in aggressive ways that don't maybe adhere to certain principles. So that does come to shutting down speech, like trying to destroy people's careers, which has absolutely happened on both sides. You see it happening a lot more on the left. But the reason you see it happening a lot more on the left is because the left has more power. They can do it. It's easier to do it. If all the structure is set up where that's who can do it, then they're going to use that power. And you see as sort of people on the right, certain people on the right regain their power in some ways, or group together and are stronger. They say, well, we're going to use the same tactics as the left has because it actually worked really well. And we're going to get the most important thing for us is to get our power back, to get this country straight, this country being the US. And, once we've sorted that out, then we'll maybe go back to the principles of, free speech and so on. And that is not, and this doesn't represent the entire right wing, of course. It represents a large group, though. And there's some people who will continue to stand by principles like free speech or not, doing campaigns to cancel people and having tolerance. But there's a lot of people who will compromise on that, just like the left. Not everyone's going to compromise on their values and principles, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, that's a terrible way to put it. You should never compromise on your values and principles. So, but I guess pragmatism is a principle. So, but just on the wokeness thing, I can't stand the term wokeness at all. It's become kind of pejorative, mostly exclusively used by the right wing. I get what, like my read of the situation is both right and left are using the same definition. This awake to systemic racism, homophobia, awake to sexism, that kind of thing. That's what it originally meant. And that's kind of still what it means. It's just that the right believes that racism, sexism, and homophobia is way overstated. So
or being weaponized against them.
Yeah,
I think that's, yeah.
Well, I think part of it being overstated is how you weaponize it, because if it's a minimal problem in society, you're not able to weaponize it. So you're constantly making it seem worse than it is so that you can use it for nefarious purposes.
And I absolutely hate that word too. So I'm kind of glad you said that. Because
look, I'm looking for another word if you like.
Yeah, me too. Well, ideologically captured, or bully is often a good way to describe that behavior. It's a bullying behavior. It's intolerance. But yeah, we need a better word because it is. I have a series on word misappropriation, and I did include woke as was one of the words. So I talk about how words are divorced from their original meanings and being used in different ways. So I find like word like Nazi too. Like I'm like, okay, if you're gonna
Yeah.
call somebody who doesn't like the same brand of coffee as you a Nazi, that's like not great. But when with wokeness, what bothers me is like everything is called woke now as a pejorative. And I think it's not helpful to the discourse. And I am a pragmatist in the sense that I like to look at like what's the most useful thing, and to just call people names, which is it is what it's doing, is not useful. You're not going to like convince anybody of anything different. You're not going to have good discourse. That's not a good way to start. So I don't like any kind of language like that. And I think there was a point where I was using the word more, and I've really self-reflected and stepped away from that for that reason, because I just don't find that word to be useful, and
It's
it just brands people.
how do we have this conversation though? That's the thing.
It's a
It's the
shorthand.
word that everyone's using now. Yeah,
It
exactly.
is, and it's a shorthand, and that's why sometimes I will use it. Or like, I wrote about the right-wing woke, right? I did that intentionally because I knew the word would invoke certain feelings and thoughts. So sometimes you do use it. I just like to use it sparingly and to make certain points instead of just like, oh, those woke assholes, like that is just not helpful. Just like there's many other ways that I see, especially the right. Well, I mean, there were many words on the left that they used to stain the right, but on the right they also have a lot. I get called libtard and all sorts of things myself. I've been called the Nazi, by the way, by both the left and the right.
Yeah, you
So
can't avoid that. So
yeah,
if we think of woke as like left-wing authoritarianism, there is obviously right-wing authoritarianism. Is that what you mean by right-wing woke?
it is. Well, in both cases, I would say that it is a type of authoritarianism, right? It's just, authoritarianism doesn't, is generally associated with governments and how they run. And right now, that's not the government, but it is about controlling people's behavior and deciding, what's right, what isn't, what's morally correct, what isn't. And if you step beyond that based on some subjective judgment, there's a punishment of some sort. So it is an authoritarian tendency that's in human beings individually and as a group or as a culture. So that's how I see it. And of course, once it crosses to the point where it's authoritarian in terms of structures of governance, that becomes a whole different thing. And we obviously see that around the world, even including today, where there are very much authoritarian governments who also dictate what people are allowed to say, for example, or what they do, how they can live their lives, where broach it, there's a level of authoritarianism always in society because there's some rules, right? Like if you commit a crime, you go to jail. But that those rules are there to protect people from each other, to protect society, because your freedom is yours until it crosses over and infringes on somebody else's, and that's where the government might step in and have some tools. But when it comes to things that are your personal liberties, right? Things that you might just choose to do, say, live, and that don't necessarily affect other people, you know, I think when a government steps in, it is authoritarian. And just recently I was I saw, oh, what's his name? Something Walsh. I forgot his full name, but he's
Matt
like one
Walsh?
Matt Walsh, yeah.
Yeah, he's the right-wing authoritarian,
Very,
definitely.
very much so. So he was saying everybody wants to outlaw porn, right? He's like, that should be a no-brainer, should have already happened. We've had this outlawed already. Well, we also had alcohol outlawed, and look what happened there. Um,
That
but
was a
this I
progressive movement as well. They,
outlawing
yeah,
alcohol.
prohibition, outlawing alcohol. Yeah,
I didn't know
when
it
the
was progressive.
progressives, yeah, when progressives always, they say they're always on the right side of history. I always bring up prohibition because, and if you look in I actually read a book on this because it's so fascinating. It
Hmm.
was all the big business brewers against the communist feminists who were in favor of outlawing alcohol. Yeah, it so lines up with the progressive and conservatives of today. Big
It's so
business
interesting because
versus
they're the
the little
same.
guy.
This is what I see, though. This is why this whole left-right thing doesn't quite work anymore. And it's more somebody, I forget, horseshoe theory. I think that
Yes.
works
Yeah.
really much better. And to me, I look much more than left or right. I look at, okay, how liberal you are, or how authoritarian. Liberal in terms of, allowing personal freedoms versus
Then why are
infringing on them.
libertarians on the right now? That always mystifies
That
me.
was weird because
Yeah.
I think when I was really young, when I was like in university, I was like, I think I'm a libertarian, but I didn't think of it as being on the right. I thought of it
Yeah.
as being like very left, I guess, but like not in the communist way, but capitalist left. Um, and just freedoms and liberties. And it's so strange to me that now there's like, well, there are left-leaning libertarians and there's also right-leaning libertarians.
Yeah, but what does
And
that even mean?
I honestly like, because the right-leaning libertarians, like I was quite surprised. I was in a debate with one a little while ago, and she was like advocating for pro-life, like she was against pro-choice, against abortion. And I was quite surprised because I've never heard a libertarian make that argument before. So I was like, okay, what's going on here? And some of the
Someone's a little
views
confused.
I know, and there's some like Twitter accounts because different libertarian locations or organizations have like their own accounts, and they're so all over the place. Some of them are like the libertarians that I used to know, and some of them are like really radically right wing, like quite far right, I would say, in the positions that they take. And I'm baffled by it. It's just such a strange party now. Like, how do you run for election? Not that they would win, but how do you run a campaign when your members are really not the same at all? They're like opposites of each other ultimately.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time before they find out. Hey, Sitch, do you want to give your definition of woke, your take on
Sure.
woke? Yours is like much different than mine.
Oh, I'm interested.
Well, so I think there's two components. There's the behavior and there's the ideology. And the behavior of it, I agree with you. It's kind of like this puritanical cancel culture, my way or the highway sort of, we need to use kind of cultural force to make sure everyone kind of falls in line. And that's kind of the behavior that I think people are kind of reacting to. And it seems weird for a lot of people who are, I'm like in my 30s, and for a lot of people who are around my age or older who kind of grew up with, seeming like the moral majority was the right, who were the one that was kind of trying to censor everything and cancel everything. And then to see, around 2014, 2015, that kind of slowly shift over to the left, it was kind of like a jarring experience, I think, for a lot of people. But for the ideology of it, the way that I define it is that it's the idea that the various inequalities of our society can't be solved via liberalism, and that there needs to be some kind of push towards a far more leftist ideology to solve all the systemic injustices in our society and bring about equity.
It's a good definition.
Could there be a right wing version of that, Sitch, where they're pushing for tradition instead of equity?
Well, I mean, obviously there can be a right-wing version of the behavior, the ideology. I mean, you could play around with it, yeah, and say it's just the idea. Like you could rework the definition to be anyone who just thinks that liberalism is bad, I guess, and
There's a
wants to
lot of
push
people on the
to
right.
right and wants to push to like a further, edge of the spectrum to get there, and that would be kind of like right-wing wokeness. So, I mean,
Well, and it is
yeah,
about control, though. Like in either direction, it's ultimately about control over others and
sure.
thinking that you got the right perspective. We are so right, you're so wrong. Because most people can't even agree what the systemic racism looks like in society, where it exists or where it doesn't exist. So it's ultimately one group decides, okay, we know we're the authority on this, and we are going to force this set of behaviors or values or actions on you. And
Hmm.
if you don't agree with that, well, you're an idiot. Essentially,
Right.
tough luck.
Well, I think the insidiousness and part of the reason that like wokeness was like left-wing wokeness was able to sort of infiltrate a lot of colleges is, I mean, not only is there's a problem where whenever you have a group of people who are mostly like one direction, left or right, it seems like the extremists of that group are always going to very slowly be able to pull more and more people to that extreme because they're the extremists of the people that are like highly motivated. They're the ones that are highly energized to kind of get things done, to kind of push people in directions. And moderates are kind of more like, I don't want to be involved with this. I'll just do whatever you say, just so you shut up, kind of
Yeah.
individuals. And but I do think that there's a specific utility in kind of labeling just the left wing version of it wokeness, at least in America, because part of the reason that this stuff was kind of able to come into our culture in America was, America is very hyper aware of the threat of right wing extremism. We kind of fought against the Nazis, and we had the civil rights, and we had the idea of second class citizen for Black people, and we had slavery. And so I think because of all that, America is very sensitive to these kind of far right ideologies, where despite the fact that we were in the Cold War for so many years, we never really had communism or socialism in America. And so I think that makes a lot of people blind to the threat of that be materializing. And that's really what this thing is, this kind of wokeness is. It's this, anti-liberal socialist idea that everything is power games, that liberalism can't solve any of these problems. And I think that's why it was able to grab a hold, because people don't know how to define it. They didn't know what this thing was that was sweeping through colleges, that are sweeping through our culture. And until people can identify it, they can't really fight back against it effectively.
Yeah, and there's a lack of appreciation, I think, of what you've got here going on, because I think when immigrants come here, they really understand what
Right.
the value of the US or North America is, or Canada, versus what there's sort of this hatred that a lot of people, this sentiment that they have, where they really sort of despise the US. It's popular to sort of knock it down and say all these, think that it is, horribly racist, horribly this or that. And it just, to me, a lot of it comes out of ignorance because, as somebody who's lived in several other countries, but also, spoken to a lot of immigrants, one of the things they appreciate about the US is actually it is far less racist than a lot of the places that people come from.
Mm-hmm.
It is a country that's, there is certain freedoms that are we just don't take for granted because they were not given in these other countries. And it's strange. It's strange to see how much that hatred, I guess, towards one's own country has steeped in the culture in the last, X number of years. And I think it's a big driver as well. And not understanding that, yeah, some of these systems, like, when somebody sees what happens under communism, it's a lot of it is also about, the idea of communism isn't an entirely evil idea if people consent to it, right? That's what perfect communism is. It's where people consent. I guess the closest place you'll find is like a kibbutz in Israel or something, like a communal living situation where everyone decided, hey, we're gonna have this kind of communist, socialist, whatever you want to call it, way of living. Everybody shares, there's an equality, but it's completely voluntary. But in any large scale event where countries had enforced communism, human nature is such that it does not, because people don't opt in or opt out, then it becomes about power and structures and that gets abused. And it's just human nature. Human nature cannot allow for utopia, essentially. So, but people don't understand that because they don't see how it manifests in practical terms. So they view it just as an ideology, and it just sounds like really nice to them.
Right.
But,
Well,
yeah.
the irony is that for all of their talk of complain about white privilege, it's the ultimate privilege, as kind of what you're talking about, where all these people, especially young people, talk about how racist, sexist, horrible America, Canada is compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's such a North American privilege that these people have, and it is upsetting. It's weird to see that so much of this self-hatred for your own country and for the West, I call it the America Badlands, has sort of sunken into a lot of online spaces. And it's kind of unfortunate because recently, like at first, it seemed like it was really like the woke left that the America Badlands was really sort of, taking over everything. But now we're seeing it from the further right too, or this
They
sort of
both hate
this
the US. It's so true.
right, yeah, there's this sort of idea that like, oh well, maybe America is like the great evil empire and we need to
Mhm.
like burn it all down.
And there's a level of narcissism to that too, because it A puts them in this position of like, we're the special ones, we're the powerful ones, but also being so unique because, you go to countries like, Asian countries or Middle Eastern countries, it's not white people who are running things, right? It's a different
Hmm.
group of people. And in fact, if you show up there and you're white, you're probably not going to get treated that great by some people, and it's a lot harder for people to fit in. So it's this like it's like they're taking something that only really manifests itself in the US, the way they
Hmm.
think about it, or in Canada or whatnot, and then they apply it to the rest of the world. But that's not true to the rest of the world. It doesn't extend. Like every country has their own kind of supreme rulers, if you want to
Of
call it that,
course.
or the group that sort of control is more in control or has more power than other minorities, because minorities are minorities. They're always going to have less power just by default, unless you have this movement of let's force.
Right. Well, and that's, they constantly conflate majority privilege with white privilege. Which is what you're
Hmm.
saying. Like it's just the majority. Obviously, the majority, if you exist in some sort of majority group in any country, then your ideas, your culture will become like the norm or be seen as the mainstream.
Exactly.
And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that as long as you're not, subjugating someone else or
No,
subjugating
and
another group of people.
no, if you go to Africa, people are going to have a very different culture, right? They're going to
Right.
wear their hair a different way. They're going to eat food differently, or, they're going to have different cultural values, and that's perfectly fine. That's their country. And if you come there, you're like, you're going to be the minority, and you're going to try and fit into that, just the way that you have this here, where, people are going to, when I moved to North America, I also work to fit in here, by learning the language and sort of understanding the culture. And, you might maintain some of your culture and background. And I think that's great. I think it makes the country richer. That's at least my view. But you also come in and you join an existing culture, and of course it's going to be dominant.
Hmm.
There's a
So
special guest, I see.
Wormy's
what?
part of the stream. Wormy,
Oh.
shut up.
So, because how does this all tie into the right wing wokeness and where is that heading? Where do
Where's
you
it
think it's
head?
heading? Yeah.
I am concerned about it because anytime I talk about this, I get a lot of angry messages. People get
Hmm.
really mad. And it's
People are,
sad to
yeah.
me
Is
because
it
I
right
want,
wing wokeness just fascism?
yeah. Well, what I want people to do is I just want people to be aware, just like I want people on the left to be aware what has been going on and how they should like maybe adjust their behaviors and think things through and be more curious and tolerant and all of that. It's I because I see the same pattern of behavior, it just hasn't taken full hold yet. It doesn't mean it won't. And by the way, in states where there's certain legislature, I can't speak today, but you know what word I meant to say. It's
Laws.
laws. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's certain laws that have been put into place, and they are quite infringing on civil liberties. So, you know, power shifts all the time, and I see the power potentially shifting more to the right and you see that across the world actually. So it's not just it's kind of a counter reaction, and the problem with counter reactions, like you need
Well,
an
first, hold
opposition.
on. The
Yeah.
law. What are the laws? Are you talking about the book bans? Or are you
The
talking
book
about?
bans. And I
Okay.
looked at the book bans, by the way. It's like, okay, it's one thing to be like, okay, books shouldn't be that have like overt sexuality in
So
them,
look,
right?
you're in favor of the book bans.
I'm not in favor of the book
Well,
bans.
look,
No,
yeah, the
but
legislation is to keep these books out of public schools,
right.
which they're
But
not
for
really book bans. I mean, I think the book stuff is way overstated.
It's book moderation, let's call
Right.
it, which I think you are entitled to have some moderation when you're dealing with people under the age of 18. However, you can also say that some of them have gone too far. So when I looked at the lists of the
Well, no,
book,
let's not. What's something else aside from the book bans
Mhm.
in quotes? The like there's a anti CRT bill, which
Mhm.
I would actually be in favor of. I think that's
Mhm. Okay.
probably a good thing. So
I
I
mean, there are
just
people who want to make, for example, this hasn't happened, but there is more interest than I realized in, for example, making no fault marriage.
oh okay
So
okay.
sorry, no fault divorce.
I did see Vivek Ramaswamy making some rather interesting comments
Right.
about
And he was running
yeah
for president. So
yeah.
I mean,
But he
I've
doesn't
heard
have any legislative power. So I
not
just
yet, right?
all the stuff that I think people on the left generally categorize as like
Hmm.
right wing overreach seem to be they're gassing up the public, and the things are really kind of innocuous. So
Mhm.
the anti like the
But the reason I
anti-trans
wanted,
bills are all like parental information bills and informing the
Mhm.
parents that the kids are want to change their pronouns at school and stuff like that. I
Yeah,
think
I agree that
parents
some of
should
it
be
is
informed, obviously.
misrepresent. I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is misrepresented. I do think parents should be notified if that's the case. But
Hmm.
even with the books, though, like, because I looked at the books, I did think maybe that was an overreaction because, okay, like if it's overtly sexual content, yeah, it shouldn't be in those libraries and they should make these like changes.
Right.
But the overreach aspect of it was some of the books on that list just didn't make any sense. Like they
Okay.
didn't have any kind of content that really should have been banned. And the other way is like how they dealt with teachers who might have sort of the wrong content in their classrooms and sort of the prison time aspect as opposed to just, some kind of professional repercussion.
Right.
But and so it gives a lot of leeway for weaponizing these laws. Abortion law is another one where beyond just like the pro-choice, pro-life argument, there are laws where you cannot have an abortion or these laws have a chilling effect where doctors won't perform an abortion in cases where it's actually a medical
That's
emergency.
a yeah, that's a good one. That's a good
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. So those were some of the things. I mean, I don't think Republicans have enough power to enact a lot of very extreme measures right now and in a lot of places, but it doesn't mean that the temperament or the isn't there. It's just a matter of like how much power do certain entities get and how authoritarian, I guess, they are in what they want to do. They believe it's for the greater good. I mean, the other thing is I said like they did ban a porn website in one state recently. I mean, I think there's some issues surrounding content like that do need to be tackled. Obviously, trafficking is an issue. Kids seeing being exposed to sexual content that's inappropriate is a really serious issue. So those things do need to be addressed, and I think that could be a bipartisan effort. But I have definitely heard a lot of conservatives or Republicans who are pro just banning pornography. And I'm not saying like I'm not defending pornography because I think it's such a like amazing thing, but it is something that is a personal choice to a large extent. And it is something where you can have negative consequences sometimes that you think you're not going to get. So, for example, and I need to search this up to really confirm, but for example, what one statistic that I heard was in a place where it was banned, sexual abuse went up or sexual assault went up.
I've seen studies like that as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, I think those kinds of things are really important to keep in mind as well. There's other consequences to, forbidding things. And you see somebody brought up recently where, the countries that use porn the most are actually the most repressed countries in the world. So it's quite interesting to see how that correlates. And there's also people who will never ever have access to, somebody of the opposite gender. And so that is an outlet for them. Now I'm like, I feel like I'm defending
Denying them
porn, but
pornography seems cruel. Yeah.
it does seem cruel. I mean, I just don't think, and there's negative things that come from pornography, of course, but I think we can counter them in other ways. Then we can tackle it without like banning porn, like fully. And as you know, like when things are not, when their things are made very legal, there's a whole industry of corruption that then builds around it. So like prostitution, right? Like in some places it's legal, and so it's actually a lot safer for the people involved versus in other places where it's very legal and people get away with, horrible abuse. So it's much more complex than, one's morality.
Mm-hmm. With the right-wing backlash, I see it more not so much with laws that are coming into play currently, but the potential for what would be down the road when I see that, more and more people, it's not like a huge amount of people, but I see more and more people on the right are sort of accepting the ideas that, individualism and liberalism is actually bad, that, some extent science and like the scientific method is bad. And, there's a kind of a creeping Christian nationalism that's kind of, growing a little
Quite
bit.
strong.
Right. And there's sort of a, anti-free speech that's growing, a little bit more. And there's, these kind of various flavors of, dissident rights, anti-liberal ideas that are growing. Though, I mean, I don't know it's hard for me to predict what the future of that's going to look like, to see how much of that, because so much of that's growing, and I, predicted this years ago. So much of that to me is growing because it's a direct response to wokeness.
It is, yeah.
It's a direct response to young men, especially young white men, being told that they're horrible, racist pieces of crap, and that you have people kind of using their collective racial gender identity to leverage power away, against young white men. And so obviously, whatever weapons and tools you use, your opponents are going to use them. If they're effective, your opponents are going to use them against you as well. And so that's kind of what's going on here. But it's not, I'm curious to me, it seems like wokeness is not, obviously it hasn't gone away, but it definitely seems to be on the decline from where it used to be. People do seem to be kind of growing tired of it and standing up against it in far louder and far more mainstream places than they ever were before. Obviously, we still have a long way to go. And I'm not really sure how this coming election is going to play into that, is going to either amplify wokeness or not, depending on who wins.
Not.
All depending upon who wins.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I have no clue. If Trump wins, it could make the woke people, hair go on fire, and then the mainstream media could use wokeness as they did to attack Trump, as what they did in his first term. So that could definitely happen. Or the reverse of that could happen, where Trump wins and he steps out wokeness. I have no clue. But to me, it's not clear, even though I am afraid of like the growing contingency of the dissident right. It's not clear that once wokeness, I think, goes away, if the dissident right will continue to grow and kind of take over, or if that too will just sort of like fade off into obscurity as time progresses.
Yeah, I mean, all the things that you mentioned, those are exactly my fears. I mean, I do see the creeping Christian nationalism and this idea, like, listen, anybody can practice whatever religion they want. They are entitled to that, free practice, free association, all of that stuff. But like, don't put that on me, because suddenly you're telling me that, and I do see a lot of people advocating for this. Like, we need our Christian values back. It absolutely is a counter reaction to what's been happening on the left. Yeah. But, I'm advocating for like a more calm ground of like trying to change things without getting sort of radicalized in the process. That's the key. And I've seen a lot of people who even started on the left get really, really, really radicalized over time. Yep. And it's like, I really wanted that to never, I really didn't want that to happen to me. And I was like, very cautious with that and self-reflected a lot. But in terms of like where it's going, if Trump wins, I mean, part of it feels like it really grew a lot more during Trump because Trump was seen as this existential threat, whether that's true or not, but he was definitely portrayed as such on the left.
Mhm.
And so the left sort of doubled down on things quite a bit. Um, in terms of things, whether people are growing tired of it, yes, I can tell you that people on the left are certainly also growing tired of it. They're starting to speak on it more than I used to hear because people are being very strongly affected by this too, right? They are affected in this in the industries that they're in, their friendship circles. Every time everybody knows somebody who's slightly misstepped in their, knitting circle or something like that. And it's like so I do see a shift, and on the right, I think it's a stronger counter reaction to that because the gradually more and more people have sort of spoken up and pushed back, and some of them have even like been very successful as a result. And so people see that, and so it sort of brings out their own courage, and they're seeing numbers. So when you're the only one speaking out against it, it's really, really difficult. But now they have their own tribe of people who don't like this stuff, don't agree with it, and are quite vocal about it. So I think we are going to start seeing a decrease in sort of the wokeness, but whether that will lead to worse things potentially or equally bad things, I don't know. And then the other part of it, it is so institutionalized, and that's going to be really difficult to change at scale, specifically in things like academia in particular would be probably one of the most challenging. So, and I think people will sort of need to build new models and new institutions, as well as trying to change things from within and create that pressure for them to
Mhm.
sort of shift.
Adam, do you have anything you want to bring up?
Well, I mean, this would be a good time to ask my question. What do you think will be less dangerous? We just mentioned, wokeness the stock is on the decline now, but if Trump wins in November, we could see a resurgence. So, which do you think would be less dangerous if people believe that Trump will win, but Trump loses? Kind of like in the same way everyone believed Hillary Clinton would win, but then Hillary lost. I think part of the shock of Trump winning was everyone just was kind of not expecting it. It came out of nowhere. So I think a lot of people could delude themselves into thinking Trump is going to win and be vindicated, and he could lose to Biden a second time, which could obviously drive people on the right crazy. Or do you think if people believe on the left that Biden will win and Trump will be vanquished forever, and then Trump is their president for the next 4 years, do you think that would be more catastrophic for our cultural environment?
Honestly, I see bad outcome either way.
Yeah, they both sound horrible, but
No, and it doesn't even have to do with my I do have if I were a voter,
Mhm.
I do know kind of who I'd vote for in this
Mhm.
situation.
Well,
That
you can
said,
tell us if you want, or I mean,
nah.
oh, okay. You're like, I'm staying out of this.
I don't know what your viewers are like,
I'm
but
voting for
I'm gonna
Vivek
anger all of them.
Ramaswamy, so I mean, I'm
Oh
completely
God.
safe.
No, you're
there.
not, you liar.
I thought it's RFK, isn't it?
I can't even listen to RFK for 5 minutes without wanting to like gouge my eardrums out.
That's not his biggest problem, but it is with the voters. It is his biggest problem, probably with the voters.
I think
But
I'm a legitimately undecided voter at the moment. I
that's
could
good.
go, yeah, I could go either way. And a lot of it I think revolves around this question because I just either way, I think yeah,
My prediction is I do think probably Trump will win because he was made to be even more of a victim, and I just see such massive organization behind him, and then the whole J6 things, um and it's just there's a lot of I've never really seen, well, not never. I think Kennedy might have had the same kind of level of like real passion that people have towards him
Right.
as a president. But Trump really has this like incredibly loyal fan base, and ultimately it's about the undecideds, right? That's where it's sort of won. And a lot of people were pushed over actually by the fact that he was being prosecuted. There's a lot of people where I heard them. So it's two things will decide a vote is how well you can mobilize the existing voter base. So the people who would gonna vote for him anyways, how passionate they are about going out and actually voting.
Right.
And two is getting those undecided. And I think he's really good at mobilizing those who already support him, quite good at that. And I think he's going to do better in this election probably. And I think because he's seen as sort of prosecuted and people have such distrust towards the system, they will side with him. I don't know for sure if that's what's going to happen, but I have a sneaking suspicion. But as to which outcome is better, I mean, there is a personal bias that goes on of how I view Trump. I don't have Trump derangement syndrome, but I
Are you sure? Have you been diagnosed professionally?
not professionally. But over time, I've actually soured more on him. I think I started off as being like, I don't know, media is being really unfair. Some things that he says he really does, and some things are definitely taken out of context. And I tried to be very fair, but I have also observed things that I'm just not that don't sit well with me. But I think some of his policy wise, some of his policies are really not bad.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, I wish that like Democrats would steal them. And, but if Biden wins, I think if Biden wins, people will think who are Trump supporters will think that the election was stolen from him again, and they'll go even more crazy. And if Trump wins, I mean, I just saw the true derangement during his either way, I think it's going to be such a wild why I just don't see anybody winning in that race being like a positive thing for the US. Like I really
It's not
don't.
gonna end, huh? It
It's
isn't.
not going to end.
Yeah. The
They
culture
needed
war is on.
no, and I think they needed I think the Democrats did need to put in maybe a different candidate. I
Well,
don't
Haley could win. I mean, it's still early in the primary here, so
she just doesn't have that like but it's hard to know because Haley supporters are usually less verbose, they're less public, and I think there is probably more of them than one might think.
right.
There's a lot of conservatives that really hate Trump, like really they have TDS, right? So I think people don't know that necessarily, but there's a lot of conservatives who really, really hate him.
If Trump wins the election, okay,
Mhm.
it's November. He comes out of the winner on election night.
Mhm.
Are you going to have a tough time sleeping?
No, because I don't have TDS syndrome.
Okay, well that is our test for TDS syndrome. Like
Yeah.
if you're going to go to bed and get a good night's sleep, you're going to tell yourself, "Look, it's 4 years, at least he can't run again." Right?
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Well, for
Then you
me,
don't have TDS. We're accused of TDS all the time, but I mean, you
yeah,
can't be critical of Trump and not get accused of TDS.
I'm
So,
not gonna like cry about it.
mm,
I am
mm.
going to worry. I'll probably get a few extra grays. I am going to worry.
Well, then
That's
maybe you do have TDS. Maybe you
well,
actually do.
no, because
Oh
okay,
no.
it depends on whether it's based on like real things or not, right? I think where
Mm.
it's TDS is where it's just emotion and it's not based on any like practical thing. I
You
actually
should
worry
you should
about his foreign policy. I worry
you
about what the vision that's going to be ensue, the chaos. Um, I'm here's how you test TDS or any candidate, derangement syndrome. You ask people, can you name a few good things and a
right.
few things you
Oh
don't
yeah,
like?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you base it on like, can they do it? And can they do it in sort of concrete ways? And also you ask people, why do you think people voted for Trump?
Oh yeah, that's a good
And the
one.
people who hate him are going to say, well, who have TDS, not people who hate him, people who have TDS, they're going to say,
Racism.
because they're racist. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. They
Because
want,
they
it's the
like
white
sexism.
supremacists.
Yeah.
That's
They
right.
like that he's a rapist. That's why they voted for him.
Yeah, exactly. But if you just don't like Trump, but you are able to think critically about him, well, you'll say, I think a lot of workers felt underrepresented. It felt like the Democratic Party sort of abandoned them. They saw certain social trends that were oppressive. They felt like they were ignored and vilified. There's a whole bunch of things, and you might talk about, globalization and, loss of jobs. And Trump, for example, something that he did do right is he tried to bring some jobs back, and, there is a level of that I think is really healthy. America should be producing more American-made products. But anyways, I think you can look at it whether somebody's being is able to see the other side without vilifying the other side's viewpoints. Some of them
This
are racist, but that's not.
the thing that you're doing, trying to good faith Gary the other side, the your political opposition. It's very John Stuart Mill. I'm
Mm.
wondering when did you decide this was a good thing to do, or have you always kind of been? A lot of times people become extremely politically tribal. Have you ever been politically tribal, or just I've always been open minded like this?
I think I have always been open-minded, and like I said, it's about curiosity for me. Like I really want to understand why somebody thinks what they think. But I had some role models that I really learned from, or some experiences as well. So for example, Daryl Davis, one
Oh
of the
yeah,
people who I actually interviewed him for a book it's coming out today. Um,
really,
yeah, it's called No Apologies.
really.
And he was one of my interviewees, and he is so he's a black civil rights activist and jazz musician, but he's also really famous for talking to members of the KKK, and he now has a hood collection because a whole bunch of them left the KKK because of him, because of the friendships, and they couldn't be the same way once they got to know him. And I also remember seeing this guy who was also part of the KKK on TV, and he was an active, member. He did commit crimes. He went to prison. And, it's somebody who had judges horrible based on their actions and thoughts. But that same guy now actually works to get people out of the KKK. So the idea being is that you don't know how somebody fell into this mind trap. And if you try to understand it and have civil dialogue, sometimes people might change their mind just by being exposed to someone who isn't, attacking them and judging them, or figuring it, or maybe it's a lack of information, a lack of context. And so, that is a philosophy that I very much subscribe to and have been inspired by people like Daryl Davis. And that has been a big motivator for me. Now, I sometimes do struggle to talk to some people. Like sometimes I do get a little bit more emotional, and that's not where I want to be when I'm conversing with people like that. But it shows you that people can change, and not everyone, as he says in the book, he's like, I'm probably going to go to the grave. Some people are going to go to their graves, being hateful and racist and all that stuff. But some people change, and I've seen a lot of people change their views on all sorts of things. Like people, you have to give people that grace to change, and you can only do that with conversation, including yourself, myself. I can change my views too, and I should be willing to.
Yeah, the thing I love about Daryl Davis is it's a testament to the power of listening. Nobody in
Yes.
this day and age wants to listen to anything.
Well, because
They want to
he didn't try
talk.
to convince them, hey, stop
Yeah,
being racist.
exactly.
He didn't
Yeah,
yell at them.
exactly. He listened to
Yeah.
their experiences. They felt like they were actually being heard by somebody. They're like, wow, a black guy that's actually cool. I can't
Yeah,
believe it. So it completely
exactly.
changed their outlook on everything. Yeah.
That's kind of why I go like sometimes on some of the shows where like my ideological viewpoints are very different from the hosts. And I want to model that behavior, and I want people to see like, oh, look, a liberal who's not attacking me, who's not, calling me a racist. Like, I think it's important to show people through your own actions that this is possible, that you can have. I've talked to Nazi, not Nazi supremacists, but like people who like true white supremacists, right? Who
Mhm.
hate Jews and all that. And I remain really, really calm, really friendly and polite and nice to this person. I killed him with kindness. And I just was like, oh, tell me, like, why do you feel this way? What about this? And I just had a conversation with the guy, and he was definitely trying to provoke me. And it went from there to like him really apologizing for being so rude.
See,
And
that is, I mean, as far as psychology goes, that's the way to win people over. But in this environment, if you're nice to someone that anyone perceives as, detestable,
yeah,
you are the one that they will come after.
guilt by
They,
association.
yeah, they feel it's your obligation to
Put them in their
castigate this
place.
person. Yeah, exactly. How that just sets us up as a society for failure. How are we ever going to come together if you're obligated to kill the person on sight?
Well, that's why people get more extreme, right? Because we no longer talk, so they get more and more extreme because they'll only talk to people who also share those same extreme views. And for me, I really look at it, I'm very practical in a way, right?
Mhm.
Because what is going to serve this situation better? Me to scream at the guy and say, "You're a racist, you're a anti-Semite." Like, what is that really going to achieve? Nothing. He's just gonna be like, "Oh, these sensitive Jews." I don't know, whatever he's gonna think. And for me, like, but if he has a conversation with someone who shows them, look, this person is like pretty nice, like engages in good faith, isn't attacking me, maybe he'll like have a little bit of curiosity to maybe learn more and think maybe I don't have it quite right. And it's not about me trying to convince him, because I also know that that's not going to work. Um, but but I think that engagement and that just opening up somebody to curiosity and being like, okay, maybe I don't have this quite right, and planting that seed and then watering that seed at some point. I think that's going to have much better consequences for our society than me being like virtuous and being like, oh, you evil, I have to shut you down.
Yeah. I put a link to your book in the chat, and I'll put a
Thank
link
you.
in the description as well. I really like the name of your book. The only time that I really get angry with people on the show is when they try to muscle a public apology out of me. So your book is called No Apologies, which I completely agree with. So
And I'm
I
a
mean, I
very
don't.
apologetic person generally, but I think if you know you're right or you believe you're right anyways,
Public apologies are always bullshit. They're
of course they
always
are.
bullshit.
You
You're
don't owe
trying to get out of
anybody an
trouble.
apology unless you've wronged them. Like
Yeah,
if you wrong them, then
exactly.
you go to them and you
Exactly.
apologize and make amends and behave better in the future, which is the best apology, is like changing your actions. But
Yeah.
when it comes to, with the public, like why do I owe the public an apology if I was just rude to Joe,
Yeah, exactly. Joe can fuck off.
I would apologize to Joe if I really wronged Joe, if I believe that I wronged Joe. But if you don't believe that you wronged somebody or said something that, was so horrible, then yeah, you should not give in to the mob, because
Yeah.
that's not, yeah, it's not going
Joe
to
can
serve
get over
anybody.
Joe can get over it like an adult. But
Joe can absolutely get over it, and we need to have more resilience. Listen, after I've read all the comment sections of all the shows that no, not all of them, but like I am not reading this
you
one,
just
don't
don't
worry.
read. Yeah, don't.
I'm
You
not
shouldn't.
reading.
So don't subject yourself to that. So
Yeah, okay, I can already tell.
our comments are usually a lot nicer than other people. I've seen other people's
Okay.
comments. I'm like, oh God, what's going on
Well, the
here?
Tim Pool comments were like,
Let's
oh,
talk about the Tim Pool, because look, I reached out to you because you were on Tim Pool's The Culture War probably like 6 months ago or so,
mhm.
and I was super super triggered. One
I
of
know,
the
and I
things
thought it
that
was about me first. I'm like, oh, how did I trigger him? But I'm glad it wasn't me.
one of the things, and this is another thing that constantly triggers me on the show, when people just straw man me, when I'm like, they make up some argument that's completely incendiary. And Tim Pool kept doing this to you. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so bad. So he kept trying to put you in a box saying that you were pro-war. And to
Yep.
me, the analogy is saying, if you support the right to self-defense, you're pro-violence. Like,
Yeah.
just admit it. You're pro-violence. It's like, no, I'm pro using violence as a way to defend myself, right? And in the case of Ukraine, it's obviously self-defense. You're not pro-war if you're supporting a nation who has the right to defend themselves from invaders.
Yeah, and my point was like, well, even if you're pro them making some kind of a peace agreement with the country that attacked them, well, okay, that's fine. At some point they can, but if they are not in the best position to negotiate that, right? You can't just then you're just saying that that country has the right to walk all over them and do as they please and continue to do that. The reason that Ukraine needed to fight back and have that strength is because that's how they, even if they do come to the negotiating table, which at some point probably will happen, they need to be in a position of strength, not weakness. And if you withdraw any kind of support, then you're putting them in a position of weakness where it's not a negotiation, it's a hostile takeover.
Yeah. Yeah. Sitch, you have anything to... You watched the Tim Pool discussion as well, right?
He's frowning.
Sitch, maybe you're muted, or maybe you ran off to the bathroom or something. But the another thing that I don't know if you followed up afterwards, but the part of the discussion that you had involved... Well, actually, give me just your take of the back and forth. What was your assessment of it after you had done the show?
I think he got offended because I called him.
He got offended? Tim got offended?
Before we started filming.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because he sees himself as a centrist, and I said that he was a right wing. Because if anything, I'm closer to being a centrist than he is. And I think that I don't know how offended. I mean, I just think that's part of his style, is that he does this like back and forth. For me, it was an interesting concept because I haven't really done a debate before, and it was also two sort of against one. And originally I thought that the person, Ashley, who was also on the show, Ashley St. Clair, she was going to be debating me. So I'm like the token lefty, she's the righty. And we were going to debate, and then Tim kind of took over. So then
this happens every show. I don't know if you watch the show regularly.
Yeah, but it was
it's like Tim in the
days.
third wheel.
Yeah, and I think she might have felt that way because, if she goes too strong, it's like it looks really, really bad. And so it just left her in a kind of a strange position, I think, in some ways. And then I think his audience sometimes sympathized with me because it did feel like it was on the attack. I didn't feel attacked in the moment. It's just a little bit different. Like I do take a little bit more time sometimes to get my thoughts together, and I need to reflect on things. And it sort of goes bam, 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 switch topic, switch topic, switch topic. And then certain things come out of nowhere. And I'm like, I don't even understand the argument you're making. So, but I didn't suffer through it. And then afterwards we did play poker, and unfortunately, this was the worst part. I lost.
Oh, really?
Really badly. Yeah. And he's very competitive.
What kind of poker did you play?
Just regular.
Mixed hands.
Yeah. Yeah. And for money, because apparently they don't do it unless money is involved. So.
Well, I hope you didn't miss the mortgage payment or something.
No, it was just a token amount, but it definitely stung because I thought I'd hang in there a lot longer. I was going to show these people who's boss, and just didn't happen. I liked his career a lot. They were like really, it was quite fun, and I did a lot of accents, which I probably shouldn't have done. And then I drank, they had this right-wing beer. I forget what it's called exactly, but I think it's called like something like right-wing beer.
Mhm.
And so I just thought it was like a really funny can. So I drank it and then I took a picture and I posted it. And the owner of the company said, "How did you like it?" And I said, it's almost as good as Bud Light."
Sure, they
He
love
never
that.
responded to that, which missed opportunity. I was just being, I was friendly ribbing, hazing,
Yes.
bonding.
Tim does get accused of, I mean, being right wing all the time. I think the show that you were on is the first time that I actually was like receptive to the claim that he is really right wing, because
Hmm.
he does defend a lot of these right wing narratives that I do think are factually incorrect. The Biden firing Shokin, the prosecutor in Ukraine, we've gone over that. We've debated people on it. I think his facts are completely incorrect there. But
Mm-hmm.
he continues to bring it up. He brought it up with you. The Ukraine war. It's like all of his positions completely align with the right wing perspective, narrative, even if the facts I think are
Well, and he
specious.
can claim that people on the left don't want to come on his show as much, and that's fine. But the topics that he chooses to tackle, right? If he was
Mhm.
in completely, a centrist as he views himself, well, then the topics would be a little bit different, because he gets to choose what he has on the show, but everything seems to more align with like a particular conservative position. And, you could have an episode on prison reform, right? Like I have a podcast and some of the topics, I'll tackle all sorts of things like homelessness and AI and there's just a more I try to have a little bit more variety, and I think somebody with his platform, he could absolutely have um you know other topics of discussion. So it's okay to have some right-wing views on some things, but if it's everything or if that's all you're actually like covering, then it does align more with the right. So I don't know why I was quite surprised actually that he pushed back on that. And maybe at some point he was more of a centrist, because I think when I first came across him, I probably viewed him more that way. But looking at his show now, I mean, I think his audience would agree with me. In fact, I know they have, because when I've said it, they're
Well,
they have.
we, I mean, we have called ourselves centrist. I'm like center left,
Mhm.
independent. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of times people listen to the show and I'll say something that's very right wing and they'll just assume that I'm right wing. And then I'll say something very left wing. We talk about like UBI and MMT and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And they're like, oh my God, this guy's a total
Well, I'll
left
say this
winger.
whole time that we've had this discussion, I was like, I can't tell. So I
Okay.
think you succeed, because I mean, I've gone back and forth in my assessment, because it's things that you say are not like they don't really fit on either side very
It only
concretely.
matters what the internet can make up and convince people. So,
Yeah.
but the the thing that I always try to do, and especially like if you want to talk about the Shokin thing and the prosecutor being fired and all that, I can give you both the left wing and the right wing narrative, and I can show you where there's weaknesses in both. And in sometimes there's situations where I mean, we really can't know. We really don't have enough information to know. And people will always lean to their side, lean to their narrative. And I will kind of keep both narratives open because I'll be like, we don't have conclusive proof here.
And
You can't really say that.
more
Yeah.
people should do that. I'm often very undecided on things, and I think people give me People don't like that about me,
They
I think
don't like it.
sometimes.
Yeah.
No, they don't like it because it's uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable. Like, if it's uncomfortable for them, for me not to have a position, think how it feels for me not to have. Because I kind of go, I do want to have a degree of certainty about whatever it is that I'm saying, whatever my position is. And it's true, I sometimes don't have all the information or have a lot of information, but I can really see both sides of it. And it makes it very difficult for me to really make like a very, very strong stand, take a very strong position. So often I won't. And or I do change my mind a lot. Like I maybe too much, I don't know. But then at the same time, I think some people don't change their minds enough. So maybe there is more of a middle ground, but it is just how I am. I can't really do much about it. I need a lot of information to make up my mind. And sometimes I can because I just see the points in each position really, really well. And ultimately how it feels, how where I stand on something is based on feelings, not logic, because the facts kind of support either position.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you got to use your intuition to a certain extent. So, but I'm always aware of that. But the so we have a lot of overlap with Tim in this, you know, people perceive of us, people who watch the show perceive of us as centrist, but other people
Mm.
online, they want to target us and turn us into whatever they
Yeah,
want, you know, communists or Nazis seems to be like
me
the
too.
take. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, for the first time, I used to be a lot more generous with Tim about that just because I was
Mhm.
in a similar situation, but
Yeah.
I'm less and less when he's just completely, you know, selling a narrative that I think is factually incorrect. And I mean, I've been following Tim Pool since the beginning, and Tim Pool used to be much more about, you know, straight news journalism
Hmm.
and wanting to give people the facts. So it's a tough environment though to survive. People don't
And
want the
that's a big part
facts.
of it. That's
Yeah.
really a big part of it because those people who do really well with their Substacks and the YouTube channels and all of that, I think largely are going to lean in more of what their audience wants. So they have that audience capture. And
Yeah.
even if you're not making a living, just being on social media, I mean, you see it a lot. And you have to be able to actively reflect and fight against that tendency and just stick with what you really believe and based on your research and not based on what the audience wants. But the people who get the most financial support, you know, it's almost impossible not to get it unless you lean in into some of these things. And I know that I mean, as somebody who doesn't, it's like very, very difficult to gain that level of like zealot loyalty because it's cause based ultimately, right? People donate or buy in or your advert whatever. It's all based on like their emotional connection to the cause. um there's
True.
some
Yeah.
exceptions, but like I think trigonometry is a pretty good example because I think they have sort of remained um yeah, centrist and not quite.
They're definitely on the closer on the right wing side. I mean, we have a larger right wing audience than left wing
Mhm.
audience, so we would definitely be in that
Mm.
trigonometry space. We fight with our audience all the time, and it probably hurts us
Mm.
financially, but what are you gonna do? Right?
Well, it's true, but that is integrity. And well, I think with trigonometry, I wouldn't say, I mean, I think some of the topics, some of the people they brought on definitely are more than right. But they do push back a little bit. And I would say the two guys hosting it, I think they would see themselves on the left. They wouldn't see themselves on the right, but kind of center left. And but not even there. Like again, these categories are sort of outdated, like, because it assumes I have some views that would be considered progressive, like prison reform, drugs, medicine. I would say my views are pretty progressive on those fronts. I have some views that are more conservative, like I think a lot of fiscal things to some extent, and then maybe immigration would be another one. Not crazy right-wing views, but like, I do believe in enforcing borders, for example. I don't, honestly, it
Yeah,
shouldn't
we're
even be
not.
a left-right.
Yeah,
I
totally.
mean,
Oh,
Biden is doing a legislation now, right? So it's not like even super right wing, but
Yeah, the left is going to become super border hawks here pretty quick.
yeah. Well, they have terrorists coming in. I didn't even know this. Like, I
They,
really did think that the right was making a big fuss of this. And then I realized, oh, like it is a legitimate security threat. And it's like, yeah, you should do something about that. Like, if you have people on a terror watch list in 2022, I believe it was 100 people that they found, right? So some
yeah.
got in, they did fine. And then in 2022 doubled. And then this year, sorry, 2023 doubled. And then this year it's already like at 50. And this is just January. So something is going on. And it's just fact based to address it. Like it's not about any kind of ideology. It's just practicality. So I guess I'm
Well,
like
but this
practical
is,
ideologically.
yeah, look, I'm a total pragmatist. So this is one
Mhm.
of the things that I hate that the left has done. And I'm not sure that the right has really done this, but the left has kind of conditioned people on the left to reflexively ignore anything that the right says, and
Mhm.
and think that it's just they're playing it up for some sort of political advantage when they do have legitimate grievances. And I kind of conceptualize left and right, and I don't think the terms are outdated. I do think there is kind of this left wing that evolves in every society, and the left is more of the offense. Like they're the ones that are always trying to push the culture forward, and
Mhm.
the right is always cautious of the gains that we've already made. They're more worried about losing what we've already accomplished. So there is kind of this push and pull
And
between
you
the
need
people who want,
both.
yeah, you totally need both.
Yeah.
It's like I wish that we lived in a society where people were educated in this way and they understood that certain people have an intuition for safety and security.
Mhm.
They're worried that we're going to, piss away everything that we've done for society. And then there's other people who are worried that we're missing opportunities in the world, that we're not taking advantage of everything that we could be doing. So I just those intuitions are both
Mhm.
useful. If you think of it like a football team, what good football team has only defense or only offense? You need both sides of the coin in order to be successful.
Well, think about something like a topic that I've been very interested in and doing a lot of research is AI. And
Yeah.
AI, okay, you need people who want to progress in order to push the technology forward, create cool things, you find applications for it. But if you don't have people saying, hey, you need to be
Yeah.
careful here, and maybe we need to put some safety blocks here, and maybe not a free for all completely, then that's a problem. But I do see, like, even as I'm talking about this particular topic, it's interesting because I was the one wanting to put some safety blocks. We're advocating for it recently in a conversation, and it was actually the more people more on the right who were arguing with me about not wanting to do any
Well,
of
look,
that.
that I think the labels could be mixed up in the same way.
Mhm.
Like I think libertarians are monomaniacally focused on individual rights,
Yeah.
individual freedoms. I think they suffer from psychological reactance when people tell them you can't do something, they want to do it more than ever. So I feel
Yeah.
like they're them ending up on the right is just kind of a misunderstanding that will ultimately be worked out. I do think
Mhm.
people who have kind of weaker intuitions can find themselves classified in any camp because they're just going to where the people they associate with are. A lot of people that
Mhm.
they're friends with, they call themselves liberal or they call themselves progressive or they call themselves communist. They're like, oh, I'm a communist because
True.
everybody around me is
Not
saying
as
that's the cool
common.
thing to be. Yeah. Well,
I think
I don't.
communists feel like a little outcasts too
What
sometimes.
I mean, Hassan is like the biggest Twitch streamer. Hassan Piker. I don't
Hmm.
look. I think it's cool to be a communist now. I
Yeah. If you're gonna be like him, then yeah, it's best not to be. He's not a good model of what a communist looks like.
know
Well, he is
it's
capitalistically very successful, which is financially. So the irony of that is quite fascinating.
he is. We've made a lot of videos about Hassan because he is like
No, I
it's
have
pretty
talked to
funny.
some I have talked to some like really interesting communists though, who kind of understand that this is not going to happen. So I think they're just more intellectually interested in the idea, and they are really like thoughtful and well read and actually pretty open-minded. Doesn't happen that often, but
Communist?
I have a few. Yeah, yeah.
Have you
So,
talked to Ben Burgess? Because Ben Burgess
no.
drives me crazy. Like,
Yeah, no. I
I
mean, they're
have him
just
on the I have him on the
normal
show.
people.
We've talked to him, and I just look. I'm one of these people that wants to drill in on a topic very specifically. Like I want to
Mhm.
dissect it. And some people you talk to, and it's just like topic bingo. It's like, come on, we're trying to narrow things down here, not move on to like 15 different things. So I should look. Ben, I'm on good terms with Ben. Ben has been on the show a couple of times, and
Okay.
I think last time he was on, I brought this up. I was like, listen, we're going to focus on the topic here.
No, but we do need to talk to, again, like everybody, including people on the fringes. Sometimes not everyone's going to have the same appetite. I wouldn't force anybody to do it. I wouldn't force myself to do it because sometimes I really, really don't want to. But I do try. Um, I've struggled, I've come across some very radical individuals in the last little while, and it has really challenged my ability to sort of communicate. But probably should make more of an effort because and by the way, I think some people I will never ever, like I can tell they're not going to come up from the fringe, but people who have a little bit of self-doubt might, or willing to listen, they might. And uh, yeah, I should at least make the effort.
You're talking about changing people's minds. Is that?
Hmm. That sounds kind of authoritarian of me, isn't it?
Well, no, look, if you can do it persuasively, it's not
Well, I
authoritarian,
do it. I don't
obviously.
even do it with, look, I believe when I believe their minds are made up because of limited information, all I can do is like I'll present more information. I'll give them more context. It's their free will whether they want to change their mind. I'm not gonna manipulate them into it. I'm not gonna like force them into it, change their
I
minds.
mean, a little manipulation is, I
A
mean,
little
that's,
manipulate. I used to be more.
look, you
Well,
gotta be wise about these things.
persuasion is being effectively able to communicate your ideas. That's persuasion is. And look, if I believe in something, I want to be persuasive in how to communicate them because I want to be accurate. I feel like the
Is
idea should
persuasion
persuade them.
manipulation? Is
No.
persuasion
It
manipulation?
is when your intent is like if you're omitting information in order to persuade,
Right.
if you're only presenting one side, intentionally hiding something. But if you're just saying, listen, this is why I believe this was what you might be missing from the conversation. Here's maybe something you might want to look at. I don't think that's manipulation. I think it's providing somebody additional context. It's building their world up. It's actually giving them something. Like I find it when somebody argues with me or disagrees with me and they do it in good faith, they're giving me a gift of knowledge, of the ability to question myself, to challenge my own perspectives. So that's what I would like to do for other people when I can.
So many people though, they don't want the truth. Like they're not really even prepared to engage in good faith. So I mean, look, obviously, I'm trying to have a good faith conversation with you. It feels like you're trying to have a good faith conversation with me. I don't know that we're really doing the persuasion thing. It doesn't seem like you're trying to persuade me of
No.
anything. I don't. I mean, I really, and on the show. I think it offends some people. Like we've had conversations with people who they really want us to come out and like endorse Biden like they think,
Mm,
that we have a decent sized audience, and they think if we're not trying to convince those people that they should vote for whatever candidate
mm.
they want, then we're not doing the Lord's work, I guess. So,
Oh, yes,
but
yes.
I very seldom try to play the persuasion game. I
Hmm.
do. I mean, I have different policies. Like I'm super interested in UBI, and I've been trying to convince myself as long as we've been doing this that UBI will work, that UBI is something that will happen and be good for society. Kind of in the same way that, there was a time when they thought if they got rid of slavery, it would cause everything to just fall apart.
Well,
And they were wrong.
UBI
Yeah.
was actually something I changed my own mind on.
Oh, really?
Because I was
But
quite, I
for
had
or
a
against?
I'm now for, but I used to have
Okay.
my
Wow.
knee-jerk reaction was I was very anti-UBI,
Hmm.
and I had different reasons for it, but I've actually changed my mind, and a lot of it has to do with the technology that's coming and the changes that are coming in the
Oh,
world,
yeah.
specifically with AI, and I've arrived at this conclusion that it's probably going to be necessary. So I think maybe like when Andrew Yang suggested that, and when he ran for president, that was like a little bit too early. And I think we're still a little bit early, but it is something that we probably should be thinking about in the future. And there's a lot of people who disagree with me, including I think my own parents. But I do find it. I think we might have to have that. It's just not, you can't quite avoid it. And it will be a necessity. And it could have a really positive transformation. We should plan for it, though. That's why we need to have these conversations. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
no.
completely changed my mind.
I think we should put it in place and start with just like $50 a month.
Mm,
Just to get the thing up and running, get people used to getting like $50 a month as universal. You'd have to start it small to make it universal. Obviously, there are
mm.
these different basic income pilot programs that have been enacted in certain cities, but they're always means tested. Like the real test of it is the universal part, which
Yeah.
I think it really could change things, but it will be obviously a necessity
I
once.
think it will be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
human labor is going to be. It's just going to be. It's going to be subpar. It's going to be like, why would you use human labor on this?
Yeah, and
What are you trying to kill me? You used
but
human
there's,
labor to fix my car?
yeah, but I think there's things that humans are exceptional and unique at, and those are
Mhm.
going to be the things that our society is going to value more.
Really? Oh man, I always see
You don't think
AI.
so?
Well, this look, I know it's controversial, the AI art thing,
Mm,
and I myself am an artist.
yeah.
I've
Mm.
been an artist my entire life, so
Oh.
it's interesting to me that some mindless computer can pump out, dozens and dozens of these just amazing aesthetic images, and some people spend their entire lives and just can't even compete. Like that just it's
No, but it depends
fascinating.
on like I won't own. So for example, I've used AI art when I
Mhm.
have my Substack, and I'll put a visual there. And that I will use AI generated images on, but a friend of mine who's an illustrator, she's like, "This is AI, isn't it?" She's like, "I could tell right away." She was not happy, but and fair, you can see, but it's going to get better. It's going to be harder to distinguish, but that's a stock image essentially, right? When it comes to anything that's going to really say something, I just don't think, like, I wouldn't own a painting generated by AI. There's a painting that won a competition that was AI. And listen, that's my opinion. Other people have looked at it and they're like, wow, this is so beautiful. I look at it and I just don't see it. It is beautiful from an aesthetic, like, just a neutral
Right, yeah.
perspective, but it isn't but it doesn't say anything. There's nothing to it to like connect with. It doesn't feel human. And the imperfections are also something that makes us human. And then I think the other aspects, like I think things that are going to become more popular are anything that's artisanal. The hipsters are really going to have their moment to shine. I think handmade things, anything that's like very crafty, people are going to want that uniqueness, that authenticity of like made by a human, not machine. I think certain art, humor, people say it can replace writers, but it mimics things, and it's going to get, really good, and it's already good at some things, but it doesn't process it through like one's experience, one's lens, one's emotion, and people are not going to connect with it in the same way. But it can be really good at, say, generating news, like writing here, a human being goes on the ground, reports, gets you some facts, puts it into the machine, and very quickly you've got an article. A human doesn't really need to write that article. because there's going to be
Right.
nothing unique about the human's ability versus the machines, and the machine's going to do it faster. But there's still things that I think humans are going to be able to do better that matter more to people. And I think that's where the focus is going to be. Some customer service, like if you have a human being, in some areas, that's going to be like a premium experience as opposed to like
Oh
everything
my
is done by
God.
machine.
I can't look, you can't be serious about that because that is like
I know we hate humans right now, but
the machine experience would be so much better than the human. Like
depends on how well the human does their job, like that interaction. So if you go into a shop and the human is like a jerk or indifferent, doesn't or incompetent, you definitely prefer to deal with the machine. But
that's like 90% of customer service interactions now. You're
well,
dealing
but
with
that's going to mean that the people who go into customer service, because now it's going to be this premium experience, you're going to get the best humans doing it because they're competing with the machine. So they're going to have to outdo the machine. So I think that's probably
I
where,
don't
like,
look.
no, okay.
I
It's
don't
okay. We
think
can disagree. I won't try to convince you, but I'm right.
Look on the art thing. Tell me what you
Sorry.
think of this, because
Yeah.
as a lifelong artist, like I've always had friends. Friends have always like watched me paint. Always been fascinated by the fact that I do paint consistently. Always strive to own an original work from me.
Hmm.
We always end up inevitably, we're drinking, we're out for drinks, we're hanging out, and they always come to me with the pitch. They're like, "This is my idea for a painting." And they
Oh,
want, and their idea is like for me to execute this. Now I can literally develop an AI that can paint in my style. And I can
yeah.
just send them to the AI. Knock yourself out.
But
What
you
to
still
your heart's
created,
content.
so, but you're using it as a tool. They still created you still created the style, and
Yes,
then
but
they are, and also it requires a certain creativity to give feedback to an AI to get an interesting image. Like
it's
you,
true. It's true. Yes.
so there is a inherent creativity in there that comes from humans still. So there's people who are like AI artists now, and some are good, some are not, right? So there is a reason for that. Some of them, it's imagination, being able to like, know how to give the prompts to the technology and all of that, to the tools that they're using. But, you know, people will buy prints and some people will buy the original, right? I
Of
personally don't
course.
like buying prints, or at least I will buy a print if it's cheap. I won't spend like a lot of money on a
Well, you're
print.
you're judging it on a completely different criteria because
Mm.
there is in fine art there is the component of the story behind it. The reason why they
Mhm.
want to own a picture that I've painted is because they're friends with me. They're like
Yeah,
they want a piece of my
sure.
life. Yeah.
Hmm.
And you don't obviously you don't get that with AI. With AI you're competing purely on aesthetics.
Hmm.
The problem that I have is people can't seem to separate the two and say, look, if we're just judging on aesthetics, we can line up images that are made by humans and line up images that are made
Right.
by AI and judge them aesthetically. A lot of times I mean, you can mix you may not know if the image was created by a human or an AI.
Hmm.
I think sooner or later, just doing that exercise blind, the AIs are going to way out compete the humans. And look, I also, as an artist, people always want to
Hmm.
show me their art.
Hmm.
And I like seeing the AI art from people better because it tends to be a lot better.
We'll
So
see. I don't know. You might be the one proven right. I,
we'll,
I'm being a little stubborn here, so I may
that's
be
okay. Look,
very.
I'm not trying to convince you. Look,
No, 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 I know, but we are disagreeing, and that's okay. Like by disagreeing, you getting me to consider your perspective, which is not manipulation. It's just like, okay, let me think about this from a different angle.
a little
And
manipulation. It's like a safe cracker or a pickpocket.
no, no, just like that. Have you ever learned? My parents taught me how to crack safes and break into houses.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it
Oh
was
my.
part of our tradition. Yeah, I'm absolutely
What?
lying. I'm lying. I should have stuck with it, but
That is a storied past. Yeah.
that would
Aren't
be, yeah.
I think you said you were from Ukraine on your,
Yes, yeah.
yeah. I was like the Ukrainian parentage. They're always like, yes, now
Yes,
you will
let's
learn
break
the
into
safe.
homes. I
You
don't know
learn
what
the
that
safe
accent even
cracking.
was, but it's some sort of an accent.
Well,
How you say
we
accent?
we should probably wrap up. I've been talking your ear off for about 2 hours now, but we've officially lost Sitch. Sitch texted me and said he got food poisoning, so he ducked out.
Oh
Yeah,
no. Oh God, that's horrible. Oh,
yeah,
I've only had it like once in my life and it was like one of the most I thought I was gonna die. I
yeah.
hope that's not what happens to him. I'm just saying.
Well, look, I've had food poisoning a bunch of times and it's never killed me. So I was
It
kind
didn't
of
kill
looking
me either, I think, unless I'm a ghost. I am as pale as one right now, but yeah.
I was kind of looking at super chats and seeing if any of the super chats were directly related to our conversation here, but it looks like a lot of them are off topic. So maybe Sitch and I can jump on tomorrow and read the super chats. Toxic Mix gave us a super chat for $50, which I'll just read because it's such a generous super chat, obviously. So, movements and ideas rarely just go away. They more often morph or attach themselves to another movement. If you're truly afraid of MAGA, you're almost better off having Trump win, but be ineffective than lose and further radicalize the movement. That's a take.
A take. It's an
Well,
interesting
look,
take.
people, I, I worry. I'm in Los Angeles, obviously, so I have a bunch of friends and family with TDS. So
Yes.
this is a very controversial take, but I'm leaning towards it's safer for the country for Trump to win and have a second term and not be able to run again than to lose and convince everyone that the election was stolen yet again and obviously probably be running in 2028 or I think if Trump has a second term, I think we can weather the storm and he'll hopefully he'll turn away from wanting to use the state to go after his
Yeah.
enemies because
Yes.
I think most of it is he wants look, it's a weird thing in America. Like the highest status, one of the highest, if not the highest status in America is a two-term president, right? It's
Hmm.
odd that a one-term president is considered a loser. Like I would say a, a, a CEO probably has higher status than a one-term president. Like that's how that's the difference between a one-term and a two-term president. So I
Mm.
just Trump feels like a schmuck. He's never going to go away. That schmuck, he's going to take that schmuck feeling out on all of us. What is your take on that? I know it's a controversial opinion.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's truth to this. I mean, I don't like the idea of a president who has these like
Oh, it's a terrible idea.
just some personal vendettas and like we're gonna like call him a schmuck or sorry, I'm gonna feel like a schmuck because I lost one election and I'm gonna now like mobilize people against structures of governance and never let it go. Because that does a lot of damage. So he's not putting the country first, he's putting himself first. At the same time, if he won, would it kind of appease people to an extent where they're less radicalized? Maybe, you know, maybe. And would he do a lot of damage, I guess, is the other question. I worry about the international relations side. I don't think he was bad on all international relations, by the way, because I think people saw him as sort of like the more dictatorial people saw him as being unpredictable.
In a way that
And
helped us. I
yeah,
think he's better on the international stuff, to
I
be
think
honest
some
with
of
you.
that I do think he is potentially better. So would he, it depends. I don't know what he'd do with Ukraine because what was suggested to me is that he would basically force their hands to settle with Russia essentially, and that's worries me. Um, Other international situations, I think he can probably handle it quite firmly, and I think might be better for that.
Why would he look?
Domestic,
He's
yeah.
all about relationships, and he
Hmm.
Zelensky totally supported him throughout the impeachment thing. I think
I'm
he'd be
told that he
good.
hates Zelensky and has
Really?
personal vendetta. Yeah, because
What?
I know.
What happened there? Why?
I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but I
Well,
actually know
hold on a
somebody.
second. How do you look? How much you're allowed to say? Are you personal friends with Vladimir Zelensky or something?
Not Zelensky, but I do know somebody who was very close.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, look, you don't have
But
to tell
he
me on the
also
live
has his
stream.
bias, so so it's a little bit tough to say. So I guess my hesitation would mostly be that his kind of tendencies towards isolationism. Um, but I think he's also kind of capable, probably, of dealing like with the other issue, like China, Korea, um, and Middle East. I think he'd probably be okay in those areas.
Yeah, he got the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, I mean, didn't end up, yeah, but
Yeah.
sure. And then I think domestically, I think you're gonna have, because he's not a hardcore right winger in his policies for the most part. Like, I don't think he's gonna, based on his answers, which were quite evasive, I don't think he's pro making abortion
Yeah, he's not.
illegal.
Yeah, no, there's not going
Yeah,
to be an abortion ban.
yeah, I
Like
don't think so.
he might codify it at the first safe or legal up into the end of the first trimester, which
Yeah,
is
I think
about where I'm at because
honestly, a
they,
lot of Democrats also are. So I don't think it
yeah,
would be like this massive uproar. Um, and I think he'd be good on like domestic economic kinds of things, like having more factories and things like that,
yeah.
less outsourcing. So I think there's some policies that I wish the Democrats would just like take on, but they're like, no, Trump did this, so we can't.
Can you
So
imagine if
policy
Trump
might be
did
okay.
something like UBI? Oh my.
Yeah, I
Like he
don't think he
might try
would, but
something big like that because he wants to be known as
Mhm.
like the Lincoln. He wants to be the
Yeah,
George Washington.
but I don't think he would do UBI. I don't
You
see
don't
that.
think so?
Yeah, I don't think that's where he
Wouldn't
would
it
go.
be crazy if he did though? I
It would
mean,
be
that
crazy.
would be insane.
Listen, I would love it if Trump surprised me in a positive way.
Yeah.
Why not? I want the best for people, best for country, and if it comes from Trump, fine.
It's so
But
weird though, because look, I think he would try something like that, and
mm,
the the Democrats, the people on the left, I mean, they'd call him a fascist and slap his hand away. It's so sad that we kind of live in
well,
that
isn't that
political
what happened
environment.
with the vaccine, where he was like, "This is
Yes,
Project Hyperspeed," and then you have all these people on the left who are like, "I'll never take the vaccine because Trump did it and it's horrible," and then it's like switched, and we'll
it's
never take the vaccine because the left is. It was just like the most bizarre thing, and it's like they've forgotten they even did that. So, is it like memory hold is the term?
yeah,
It's
I mean, I try to tell myself it's got to be different people at least, right? Like the same person didn't.
no.
That's so bad.
It is so bad, but it tells you a lot. I mean, I learned a lot from the pandemic about human beings and human nature. It
Oh
was
yeah.
surprising and not in a good way.
Yes, yes. Well, do you want to shout anything out? I did. I put your book in the chat, and I will put your book in the thing. And look, I'm not a I do audiobooks a lot, but it doesn't look like you have an audiobook. So I'm
I
kink.
am working on an
Okay,
audiobook.
well, I'll commit to reading it if you do an audiobook. I'll definitely
Okay,
commit to that. I
awesome.
can't I don't have time to sit down and actually read a book.
That's
So,
so sad. But yes, that is the audiobook is so much work, so that's why I'm a little bit behind on it. I haven't
how
it's not
long is the
completed.
book?
It's not that long.
Okay.
It's like 200 pages. It's
Okay,
a
so
pretty
that's
easy
easy. What are you
read.
talking about?
Yeah,
They
it's an
have
easy.
just use the AI. You can basically put your voice in and the
I
AI
know,
will give you
I
like
thought, but it does sound very robotic. I don't
well,
think you can.
it gives you a first draft and then you can go through and just do a little bit, a sentence here and a
Yeah.
sentence there and you can fix it up.
It's too late now, but it's
Oh, okay, so you're
maybe in the future. But it was very, yeah, no, for me, because trying to get it right, and then you have to restart, and then there's a sound, and then knock on the door, and then my voice goes weird, and I have a speech defect, and it's just I found it difficult. But people do seem to want read by author,
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna finish it, hopefully soon. I'm close to the finish line, and it's getting produced as I go, chapter by chapter, but it should be available soon. But yeah, the book
Okay.
is like available on Amazon, and if you're in Canada, on Indigo. Apparently it's sold out on Amazon.ca, but you can still
Did it really?
Yeah, it
Wow.
went to number one in the civil rights category, and then I think in the culture category it was like number two. But they didn't stock enough. And then it's also Barnes and Noble, and it's going to be in stores in some of the locations. I know it's in New York and DC. And then there is an ebook version and like a hard copy. And the hard copy, it looks pretty decent. Like I was like, oh, this is like a real book and everything.
Nice.
Yeah,
Look,
so
you're a professional author.
I'm a professional author now. I think I even have one like somewhere there. A copy, like, you're supposed to have a pile of books behind you. That's
Oh
the
yeah.
professional author look. And then in terms of shouting out other things outside of my book that launched today, which um I have a Substack where I write about all sorts of cultural things and sometimes really random things like imaginary friends that you make in dreams. So you never know what you're gonna get. But I have a Substack, and the easiest way to find it is Katherine Writes, WRITES.com. And then I am pretty active on X, formerly known as Twitter. And my name there is Mysterious Cat, KAT, even though I'm a dog person. Sorry, but your cat looks cute. And
I'm
and then
both. Look, I like dogs and cats. So
okay, I like cats that have personalities of dogs, and like
mine actually has that. Like you can look them up.
I could tell. You know what? I had a good feeling for, like, at first I was like, oh, cat, but I'm like, no, I have a kind of a positive feeling towards your cat, so that must be
Sit
it.
Sitch, there's a Wikipedia page for ragdoll cats. Sitch
Hmm.
email or DM'd me and said, "Look, I think your cat's a ragdoll cat." Because I've described him as a dog. He basically follows me around the house and it's kind of
That
crazy. But if you look on the Wikipedia, this is a breed of cat that is most like a dog. So
Oh, really?
it's kind of
That is
crazy.
cool.
Yeah.
That is crazy. That's really cool. So
Mm.
I'm okay with your cat. Your
All right.
cat I'd probably hang in with. And
But
then
I put your Twitter in and I put your website in and I'll put the book link in as well. So, but did
perfect.
I
Thank
miss
you.
anything or
I mean, I have the podcast, but I don't even know how to tell you people to find it. It is
that's what I want to listen
exclusive.
to. Look, I'm like,
Yeah,
why don't you have a YouTube channel?
I do. It's called
Okay.
Forbidden Conversations, but it's not the name of the YouTube channel. I think like the YouTube channel is called like Random Minds Channel, I think is the name of it.
Okay.
But it's but it does have, like, I do a bunch of interviews with on all sorts of topics, with just sometimes controversial or challenging topics, but like tackled in a more sensible, friendly way. And we covered drug, like addiction to opioids, and being a travel journalist, and homelessness with Michael Schellenberger, if you know who
Oh
he is.
wow. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and I've done like an interview with Zuby, and there's like
Really? Wow. Okay.
there's good people
Nice.
on there, really good people on there, who somehow agreed to come on because I was just as I was starting out this podcast. But I did sort of season one, and I'll go back to and I'll do season two, so it should be fun.
Cool. Cool. Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. It's a
Likewise.
great
Yeah.
conversation. We'll have to have you back on again sometime. Maybe after I have a chance to read your book.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. I really enjoyed our conversations, and Centrists United.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Well,
just want everyone to be a centrist if I had to force. I'm kidding. It doesn't work either.
that's okay. So we'll stay on. Look, I'm going to say goodbye to the audience. We'll say goodbye to Sitch next time. Thank you much for your super chats. And look, we'll do another stream and we'll read all of your super chats and take care of that maybe tomorrow. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye.